Kitco News special coverage of Bitcoin 2022 is brought to you by Coin Payments, crypto payments made easy.
Back at the Bitcoin Miami conference here with Natalie Brunell, host of the Coin Stories podcast. Welcome to the show at Kitco.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be back and chat with you again.
I know, I had you once virtually, but this is the first time we're in person. It's great, always better to do it in person, I think. Now, you are emceeing at this event. Tell us the backstory of how you basically started your career at this conference, and now you're like, you're basically emceeing the whole thing. That's incredible.
This conference is a very full circle moment for me.
Right.
Because I was so passionate about Bitcoin as a journalist. I was working at mainstream outlets in the United States for more than 10 years, both local and national. But I discovered Bitcoin in 2017, went down the rabbit hole in 2019, and I kept feeling like not only is this actually the solution to many of the problems I was covering as a reporter and witnessing kind of unfold in the United States, but also I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell stories about Bitcoin. So I started this sort of side hobby, side project called Coin Stories. It was a podcast. And I decided to collect some interviews, go to the Bitcoin conference to meet other like-minded people, launch the episodes and maybe collect a few more guests and see what happens. I had no expectations. In fact, it's funny being back here because I literally would walk up to the biggest names in the space, like the Michael Saylor, the Saifedean, with a little business card and say, can you please talk to me for my show? And they're like, who is this girl, And they said yes. They ended up saying yes. This conference connected me to so many people because the Bitcoin community is so welcoming and they want to onboard new people. And so here we are 10 months later. My show is the top show hosted by a woman about Bitcoin.
Fantastic.
I am now an educator in the space, and it's such a full circle, amazing moment for me.
Oh, yeah, your show definitely has come a long way in the last year and a half, so congratulations on that. Biggest themes you've been discussing with your guests at the show, or you've been talking to people about, what's new in the crypto space this year?
We're just so excited about how many use cases and features of Bitcoin that have been placed on a national spotlight and international spotlight with everything that's happened. I mean, think about it. We're like 4 months into 2022, and we've had, governments that are seizing and freezing bank accounts, which places a spotlight on the fact that Bitcoin you cannot confiscate like the government did in Canada with bank accounts. It's putting a spotlight on the fact that you can literally flee across a border with this asset, like some people needed to do in Ukraine. I mean, governments are soliciting donations in crypto. We have Russia saying that potentially they will accept payments for oil in Bitcoin. We have ExxonMobil saying they're going to mine Bitcoin. I mean, major headline after headline of just how Bitcoin is spreading and being adopted and being taken seriously by institutions and major brands, which we also see here at the conference.
Speaking of adoption, one of the themes that I've been hearing from people is Hyperbitcoinization. Granted, it's a new word I've never heard before until I came to Miami. But it describes a phenomenon in which everything in our life is based or, uses Bitcoin. What do we need to do to get there, Natalie?
Well, we have a saying in Bitcoin that is gradually, then suddenly. And it's this idea that, a network or a new idea in general, it starts to spread and it starts slowly at first. But once it catches on, it catches fire. And we have sort of that parabolic movement. And I think we're still in that slow phase of Bitcoin adoption and educating people about Bitcoin. But I want to answer your question, I kind of want to point to the macroeconomic environment that we're in. Because when we hit 2020 and we accelerated money printing, which had already been happening, right, for more than a decade, I think we saw a massive spotlight on the fact that America is now so far in debt that we can never really walk it back. The Fed is between a rock and a hard place. They cannot raise interest rates significantly or meaningfully like they did in the 80s because of the debt. We can't service our debt if they do. But if they keep money printing, we're going to hit double-digit inflation, and that is crushing the middle class. It's crushing savers, and that's really sad as well. So what do? We don't have a lot of options, right? Do we keep the Ponzi scheme going in the traditional markets, or do we allow the economy to crash? Well, I see Bitcoin as the life raft where you don't even have to worry about that, right? You can opt into this parallel system that's based on rules that have been set. It's programmed money that is based on specific rules with no rulers. And I think when people finally get that because the system is unwinding and collapsing, that's when hyper-Bitcoinization will ensue, because I think people will need to flee because the dollar is no longer a safe haven. You can't place any faith in the US dollar anymore.
Well, specifically, how is Bitcoin going to help, like you said, the middle class that's suffering suffering the most from inflation?
Yeah, so right now, unfortunately, a lot of people still save in the US dollar.
Sure.
And a lot of people don't hold assets. It's only the rich that hold assets. Sure. So they've benefited from all the money printing. Sure. But that's why we need to spread education about what Bitcoin is, because although it's volatile in the short term, I would rather have a volatile appreciating asset that when you zoom out goes up and up and up in value over time than a relatively stable depreciating asset or currency like the US dollar, which is going down over the same period of time. So I think it's a really powerful tool for saving and for accumulating wealth so that we can start planning for the future. Because here in the United States where I live, you know, it's so much harder nowadays than it was maybe 10, 20 years ago to plan for a future, to plan to afford your kids, to afford kids or an education or your house. I mean, look at the housing, the real estate market, 20% appreciation. I guess that's good if you're a seller, but you know, if you're just a family, you're going to have to buy a house that's 20% higher, right? So like you're kind of
losing. Would you buy a house with Bitcoin though? Wouldn't the buyer or the seller get the better deal if they get your Bitcoin?
So here's the thing. I think where we're going to move is people taking more and more loans out against their Bitcoin. I haven't done it yet. I'm not saying I'm against that. But people want to spend their fiat, which is the depreciating asset, and they want to save their Bitcoin. A lot of people want to save their Bitcoin.
Okay, just final question, I'll let you go. How are you so certain that in the long term, Bitcoin is only going to appreciate? What's your thesis for the long term?
You know, I have done so much homework in this space about Bitcoin, the network, the technology network, because a lot of times on these shows we talk about Bitcoin, the asset, and sort of the savings, you know, aspect of it. But Bitcoin is so powerful as a computer network that is completely distributed. It is around the world, and it is essentially bomb-proof. I mean, we really saw proof of that when China banned it, and we saw hash rate basically drop by half, and yet the network was resilient. It bounced back, and here we are at almost all-time high hash rate levels. I mean, the network, because of its decentralization and the fact that it was programmed to be completely scarce, digital scarcity for the first time, it has so much value. And I think it's amazing to think of a world where we could have this global neutral currency that no one can control, no one can manipulate, no one can print more of, that can hopefully usher in a new financial order that's more inclusive.
I have to press you on this before I let you go. Is there a fair value and price that makes sense to you? Surely it can't climb to infinity. It must reach some sort of level. Why not?
Well, here's the thing. At some point, I think if we adopt the Bitcoin standard on a global level, what is the US dollar worth, right? I mean, right now, we're comparing it against the US dollar because that's the global reserve currency. But we heard Cathie Wood in her speech at the Bitcoin conference say that she expects a $1 million Bitcoin in 2030. Wow. But with an inflation rate of supposedly 7%, I think it's closer to 14 to 20% a year. Yeah. What is that $1 million going to be worth, right? So I think we have to question that. But ultimately, we see the direction it's headed in. We're heading in the Bitcoin
direction. Have you heard any rumors of the next country that's going to be El Salvador that's going to adopt Bitcoin?
I thought Honduras would be announced yesterday.
Too.
Yeah, and it's going to be an island of Honduras that has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. But you know what? We're going to get there. I think El Salvador right now is the experiment that the world is watching, and I think it will be a successful experiment, but we need to give it more time.
We'll follow up when the next country adopts Bitcoin or have you want to talk about it. Thank you so much for coming to the show, Natalie. Pleasure to see you in person, and thank you for watching our show at Bitcoin Miami.
Kitco News, special coverage of Bitcoin 2022, is brought to you by Coin Payments, crypto payments made easy.